So basically Joseph Miller, he thought he figured out when the second coming of Jesus was going to happen. And it was sometime in I think it was in 1844, I believe is when he pinpointed the date. And he basically did a math equation based off of, and I'm not a theologian, so anybody who's listening and I get some dates wrong or something, I apologize. But he looked at Daniel 8:15, I believe, where it says in 10,000 years shall the sanctuary be cleansed. He thought the sanctuary was earth and being cleansed was the second coming. So this was a big deal. People left their crops in the fields and sold all their stuff and were on their rooftops. I remember when I was a kid watching an SDA produced movie on what they refer to now as the Great Disappointment, because obviously it didn't happen, right? Yeah. So SDA religion. So when it didn't happen, he said, okay, I think it's actually next year. I think I accidentally screwed up the year, so it's going to be next year. And well, it didn't happen again, and the Millerite movement kind of dissolved. And I believe there was a few different religions that came from it. I believe Jehovah's Witness was actually one of them, and the SDAs was one of them. And there was a woman by the name of Ellen White and her husband, and Ellen White would have these visions that she called them. Somebody, there's been hypothesis that she might have been suffering from epilepsy or something like that. But anyway, she would have these visions and they would travel around and basically perform for money. And so they eventually settled in Michigan, I believe, and they started what is called the Seventh-day Adventist religion. So the Millerite movement was kind of went away. They kind of explained it away a little bit where they said, oh, well, the cleansing didn't happen down here. It actually was an event that happened in heaven. And that's the way it was explained to me when I was a kid. It was that, and initially they called it, I don't remember what it was called, the shut door policy. So they had this doctrine that said, if you weren't saved by the second coming or the 1844, the cleansing, then you weren't going to heaven. Well, then they started getting more members and they're like, well, wait a minute, what about us?
Yeah.
So they kind of changed, they kind of explained that away. But, there was several books that were written by Ellen White that were kind of taught alongside of the Bible. One of them was, about the second coming and the, basically the rapture, what they would, and then the events that would, come before the rapture, which was called the time of trouble, which is very interesting because basically we were taught that the Catholic Church and the Pope would unite with a world government and create a law that said you had to worship on Sunday, and if you didn't worship on Sunday, you would be rounded up. And so I was taught that Catholics were going to hunt me down and kill me, basically. Does that surprise you, Mike?
Yeah, it does. I'm the homeschooled, sheltered guy.
Sure. No, so, but here's the funny thing about SDA is it's very, how strict they are is very regionally based. So, for instance, you'd be surprised to know that I was brought up as kind of what I would refer to as a liberal Seventh-day Adventist. You're more conservative Seventh-day Adventists, they have a particular way of dressing. They don't dance. They don't go to movies. Ellen White didn't like movie theaters. There's very little clapping in the sanctuary for a performance was considered uncouth. You would say if somebody did something amazing, everybody would just in unison say amen. When I was a kid, my little subversive activities, if somebody did something awesome, I'd go one of these and I'd start a clap because clapping is contagious, right? And then I would just sit back and I'd be proud of my creation. But you can go to there's cities in America that are almost all completely SDA. There's a lot of them in California. There's definitely a lot of them in Michigan. And you would think our proximity to Michigan, we would be a little more on the conservative side, but that's not the case. I mean, so to kind of go back to the beginning, so I went to the SDA church in Pennsylvania with my mom and my dad and my sister, and it was very small. The congregation was basically our family, and then maybe I'd say there's 20 people at the most in that church, right? Mm. And to touch back on some of the SDA doctrine and Ellen White and stuff, that really wasn't, I didn't really even know about Ellen White until I was 9 or 10 years old, and we moved to Toledo. And I had a third or fourth grade teacher that would kind of teach us some of the Ellen White doctrine, but we didn't really learn it. My grandpa didn't really preach it very much. The traveling ministers didn't really talk about it. So as far as I knew, the only difference between me and a standard Protestant was that we went to church on Saturday and we didn't eat pork.